Okay, so now we're going to continue the third embellishment that we're going to learn for chapter 10, and that's it for chapter 10. Okay, we only need to learn passing tones, neighbor tones, and suspensions, and then there are 2 exercises on the No Flight workbook, and that's it. Okay, so suspension is a little bit tricky, so hear me out. So if there is a rhythmic embellishment created when a consonant pitch is held over, so sometimes you'll see a tie, yes, suspended, so it something like this, like it's held over to the first beat of the next measure, which means you're going to held over the bar line to the next beat of the next measure, forming a harmonic dissonant right here. Okay, so this will become a dissonance with the left hand or the lower part until the suspended voice moves down by step. So that's the definition of suspension. Then you go down when you resolve back to consonant. So suspension consists of 3 parts, like the passing tone and neighbor tone. A consonant harmonic interval here, that's a preparation. On the second half the measure, meaning that this is the measure and that usually happens on the weaker beat. And this one is held over when the lower part changes the notes and it becomes a dissonance right here. And this is the actual happening of the embellishment, and make this as an accented dissonant interval. Okay, so this end up being on the strong beat, and then it resolve down by step. Okay, down by step to another consonant. So that's the gist of suspension. And this may or may not serve the preparation for the next suspension. And as we see in the previous slides, sometimes the passing tone and neighbor tone, they also overlap between preparation and the resolution. So that's suspension. And this is like one of my favorite embellishment or non-chord tones. And it sounds like this. Okay, let me play this one first. So it's like a tension, release, and then if you look at this, preparation for the consonant held over to the first beat of the next measure where the suspension is, and then resolve by stepping down to another consonant where that's a resolution. So that's what suspension is. And of course, towards the later part of the century, like 18th century, 19th century, sometimes we don't held over. We simply re-articulate. Okay, it gets freer towards the newer part of the history. And then the type of suspensions is purely marked by the interval. So upper voice suspension, like this one right here, yeah? They have 4-3 suspension, they have 7-6 suspension, and there's also 9-8 suspension. So this is only, like you see, is the labeling of the interval, okay? So this one is a chain of suspension right here, and I'm not requiring you to learn to write them. I just want you to recognize them, okay? So let's look at example. These are the 3 types of suspension when it happens on the upper voice. So the first one is a 4-3 suspension. So that's the suspension. It resolves down to another consonant. Okay, this one is a 7-6 suspension. So that's a preparation and suspension. Resolve. Yes. The next one is 9-8. Preparation, suspension, resolution. Okay. So like I said, suspension are named by the numbers of dissonant harmonic interval, and it's a resolution. So it's named by suspension, interval, and the interval after that. So the most familiar upper voice suspension are 4-3, 7-6, and then 9-8. Okay. So 16C may appear in the upper voice as well, but it's less common because it erupts to a perfect consonant. So we are usually careful with open interval, which is perfect consonants. Those fifth, A, they usually sound very hollow, so we usually treat them more carefully, like mentioned in chapter 9. There's also the lower voice suspension, and the only possible scenario would be 2-3. Okay? As for dissonant suspension minus displacements of the bass, the only common one is 2-3. Okay, or it's octave expansion, like a compound interval 9-10, resolving to an imperfect consonants. Don't write the intervallic suspension 4-5-7 with the dissonance resolving up. These are not acceptable. Okay, yeah, well, you do have to resolve down, yeah? So let's play this one here. That's a preparation, suspension into the seconds, and then resolve. The next one. Suspension. So that's a 2-3 suspension. And again, this is marked by the interval. Okay? Now I'll just give you a piece of music, and then it's already marked for you, so I'll just play through it, and then you listen for the neighbor tones, the passing tones, and the suspensions. Here's the upper neighbor. Passing tone. Resolve. Bar 9. Double passing tone. And this one is the rearticulated suspension. That's a 9th, resolve, 4-3. Okay, so as I mentioned, you can imagine in the traditional way this one would have been tied, but it was rearticulated. So in this example, you have neighbor tone, double passing tone, suspensions, all that kind of stuff. That's all for the chapter 10 that I want to cover. And you do have the no-fly assignment, but it's very easy. Only 2 of them. Let me give you a quick review. So the first assignment, you're going to have to label all the intervals. And then if you're doing on the computer, then you will mark color red for dissonance. If you're doing it on the paper, then you just circle them like the old practice. And then you have to find the dissonance and then identify them whether they are passing tone or neighbor tone. That's the first exercise. And the second exercise is the same. It's an example of fifth species, meaning 3 counterpoint. You do have to learn how to read the C clef. And then same thing, you do all the intervals, circle the dissonance or mark them as red on the computer. Now this one you have to find passing tone, neighbor tone, and suspension, or maybe combination of them. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 10. And same thing, if you have done this, then you can mark January 18th, the first checklist. Watch the video on chapter 10, slides 7 to 10, and then start working on these 2 exercises. On Friday, you'll submit them. All right, see you.